Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Brown from Living Joyfully, and I'm joined by my co hosts, Pamela Rickia and Erica Ellis. Hello. Before we get started, I wanted to encourage you to check out our shop where you can find books, courses, coaching, and information about the Living Joyfully Network. The shop has resources and support for every stage of your journey. You can find the link in the show notes, or you can visit livingjoyfullyshop.com. Okay, so today's episode is called It's Not the Unschooling, and I'm really excited about this one. But Erica, do you want to get us started?
I do. So, yeah, I think it might sound a little funny on an unschooling podcast to have an episode called It's Not the Unschooling. But we actually had a monthly theme in the network by this name a while back because it can really be a helpful lens when we come up against challenges or have areas of discomfort. So, I thought I would just introduce the idea. So basically, it can be really common, especially for newer unschoolers, but definitely not exclusively newer unschoolers, to blame unschooling for various issues that come up in their family lives. I mean, unschooling was this big new change in their lives, and so it can feel like any problems that arise are probably due to that big new change. So, for example, conflicts about screen time or bedtime or food choices or communication when kids are making decisions or the family's making decisions. So it might feel easier to blame unschooling because then there's something to change, something to fix, so that maybe the problem will go away. But often, when parents really dig down and are honest about what's going on for their families, they will often find that it's not really about unschooling. After all, unschooling, the way we describe it here, is just living life. And so, whether children are in school or not, whether you're parenting in a more mainstream or authoritarian way or not, parents and children will still be figuring out how to manage screen time, what to eat, when and where to sleep, what decisions they're going to make. And so unschooling isn't what causes those issues to exist. And we all will grapple with them in some way at some point as a family. And so often, if I just play around with the thought of, would my kids being in school or would me being a strict authoritarian parent make this situation any easier? The answer is an easy no. It would only add more layers of difficulty. And so, what I love about what I learned through the network and through my own unschooling journey is that it encourages me to focus on how my relationships I have with my children are feeling. And it actually makes navigating some of those more challenging parts of life easier. Easier sometimes feels like not quite the right word because it's sometimes not easy at all, but I feel more supported and feel better moving through the issues because of the relationships that we have. And so I could feel good about my choices when I'm prioritizing my relationships and treating my children the way they want to be treated.
I love that very much. And I am very excited about this topic because it was something that I experienced quite a bit of like in my family as we moved because my kids were a little bit older. They were in school when I discovered unschooling. And I think one of the big pieces as I was playing around with it is really what coming to unschooling did was open up so many more choices for me, right? It's like, oh, I mean, the first one, oh, they don't have to go to school.
The big
Oh,
one.
they don't have to do this. I, as a parent, don't have to do that. Like it opened up so many choices just through discovering and exploring what it meant that almost it was easier to like blame the unschooling as in it's like, oh, bedtime, food, like whatever it is. It was the discovery of unschooling that opened up my eyes to the fact that this could be a choice, that there wasn't just one right way. So it was easy for others looking in to kind of just blame the unschooling. But what I realized, exactly as you were saying, Erica, when I asked myself, oh, but if they went back to school, how would this be different? Because I realized it's one of those cases where, my eyes were open and I couldn't just go back and close them because I changed something else. It was, even if they go to school, I know it's still a choice now. I will forever know that that's a choice. Same with all the other issues. It was, for me, the unschooling journey that opened my eyes to so much of it, to the relationships, to even more consensual, just day-to-day living. And so even though I could kind of point to unschooling as the catalyst, it wasn't like the fault of things wouldn't go back. I would not be comfortable going back to life before discovering it, even if at this point or at that point they had ever chosen or wanted to go back to school, or life circumstances changed and they needed to go back to school for a while, or whatever came up. I was now kind of a changed person. I couldn't go back to who I was before, but it still meant it wasn't the fault of unschooling, right? Even if they went back to school, I would still need to make those parenting choices and have conversations with my partner, and now conversations with my kids, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because why I'm excited about us talking about this is what we've seen, especially on the network, but really even back in the day of the Yahoo groups and all the things, is when people came with that kind of, we're unschooling and this is terrible. This thing is terrible. And we kept thinking, okay, but that's not really the unschooling. But what we noticed was that it was a place to get stuck, right? It was a place to, like, it just totally lost all creativity. And as soon as we all would start talking, it happens on the network too, like just start talking like, oh, well, have you talked to them about this? Or what does that feel like? Or how's that relationship going? Or what are these other contextual pieces that are happening in your family? Then you see them go, just open up a little bit, right? Because it's not about the unschooling. We can just start talking about what's working for our family, what's working for each individual. Does it feel like when we have these conversations? And so it's really, we kind of challenged people in that month to just kind of let go of the word unschooling, which again, like you said, Erica, it seems that people are going, wait a minute, isn't this the unschooling podcast? But it really is about life and relationships, at its core. And I think if you find that that word is causing problems in your discussion, whether it be with your spouse or your mother-in-law or someone else, like let it go, because there isn't one way to be an unschooler. And I think that's another big piece. I think when we're looking at that, where we're kind of blaming the unschooling or using that, we're putting unschooling ahead of our connection with our kids or what's actually happening for the individual people. And that's what we want to be cautious about, like that. And interesting, Pam, you and I have talked about this before, like that unschooling wasn't something that I talked, like it wasn't like a day-to-day conversation and we're unschooling. It really was just like you said, Erica, we're living life and we're figuring things out about each other and we're being in relationship and we're exploring the world. And so I think it's so interesting to just kind of let go of something that might be causing you to narrow in your focus. And so that's kind of why I'm excited to talk about it today too, because I think especially if you're finding there's some rubs with your partner or with people in your family, see if that's at play, because a lot of times it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's kind of feels like two things. So one is like this word unschooling. And
Yeah.
so is the word a trigger for someone in your family? Is the word a trigger for yourself? Does it bring up a lot of feelings of I have to do something a certain way? Because that's a sign that, maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's some other layers wrapped up in there. And then the other part is just like that kind of reaching for what was familiar, reaching for what I knew as a kid or the control, right? Because we've seen that when things are stressful, when you get overwhelmed, you want to grab for control. That's just kind of like a human impulse. Like, what can I control to kind of get a handle on this situation? And so maybe you will find yourself thinking, things would just be so much easier if I could just
Yeah.
make my kids go to bed at 8, something
Right.
like that. Like just make. help me make my life better if I could just control them in some way. And so it can feel easy as like it feels like a solution when it first pops into your head of like the solution might be I just need more control. But then if you really start thinking about what that means, it's really about I'm going to stop listening to my kids. I don't care what they say anymore. This is damaging my relationship with them. You know, if I go down that path of control will make my life better. And so it really is not a real thing. It just feels like a possible solution if I'm getting super overwhelmed. And so I think, you know, reaching for that familiar, like, well, other parents just tell their kids what to do and they have to do it, and that makes life easy. If I follow the full thought process of what that means, it means disconnecting from my kids. It means, you know, kind of going against the things that I believe about the world, that everyone knows what's best for them and I want to support them in learning about themselves. And so like it's kind of separate from even the word unschooling, but
Yeah.
those kind of two different things, like either the reaching for control or the blaming this word, like this, you know, this scary word of unschooling when you first get to it. Yeah, I think it's really interesting and digging down beneath, like what's really going on for me? What's the context that's causing me to have this kind of strong response to the idea of unschooling?
And I think that's just such a beautiful and important stage of the unschooling journey.
Mhm.
And as I was thinking about it at the beginning, because this was a bigger thing at the beginning of our journey, because everything seemed to point to unschooling, like I was talking about before. And I loved your idea, Anna, about just like not using the word. Try to have conversations for a little bit without using that word, because it kind of becomes a catch-all, right? And but if you can get underneath it to really kind of better describe, it helps. I know it helped me with conversations with my partner because unschooling was often coming up, but it was like, oh, but it's grown kind of beyond that. And I think another thing that can trip us up, and we have had a whole series on the podcast about unschooling rules, but sometimes we can pull
Yeah.
up the like, oh, if we're unschooling, we do this, right? And that can really trip us up too, because that's us conflating so many of the ideas that kind of come with unschooling. So, you know, parenting styles and relationships and like all those tools and different aspects of life. And we talk about them, you know, in a way that helps unschooling thrive, which is really just like learning learning through living this life, right, is where you eventually get to. But I do think like at the beginning you can kind of like, okay, I want to do unschooling really well. I want to be a great unschooling parent. What does it mean? I have those check boxes, right? And then unschooling gets into our minds in every aspect, and then it is so tempting to kind of blame the unschooling when we start to get frustrated. And why, if they just listened, I have like this perfect solution, and everybody, this would go so much more smoothly if we just all did this one thing, which is that kind of slippery slope. If you're valuing relationships, if you're, you
Yeah.
know, if you want to make that a priority in your life, which is part of choosing unschooling, right? It's really hard to have an authoritarian relationship or parenting style with your kids and have unschooling thrive. You know, those difficulties. So really like just trying to not use the word unschooling for a while can help you get to the foundations of what does this actually mean to me? And yeah, go back and listen to the unschooling rules ones too, because
Mhm.
it's not like they're wrong. It's just that they don't have the context. If we just jump to unschooling says we don't have a bedtime, you know, and then you just take that in, like there is just so little context for you to get your feet wet and really understand what's going on. So for a while, just not using that word, I think can be really helpful to recognize how much of it really isn't the unschooling.
It's true. I want to go back kind of to what you were talking about, Erica, because I think that was an important piece for me. Because we can go to that quick snap judgment of, well, this wouldn't be a problem if we did this, or, this is why this is a problem. But taking that extra time, slowing things down, and actually walking through what it would look like helped me see where do I want to spend my energy? So, if we look at just school to take something like that, like, okay, well, if they were in school, then we wouldn't have whatever this problem is, or this, sibling fight during the day, or this, whatever thing's been going on. If we walk through that, I recognize we'd be bringing a whole host of other things into our life. And so, did I want to be at service of this other institution with, making our days and weeks and years rotate around that schedule? Did I want to be worrying about, they're going to do homework or this or that? Or did I want to figure out this problem in front of me, which has nothing to do with school or not school, which is just basically maybe we need something, I need to be hearing what's happening between my two girls, or we need to figure out something else in our life. And so for me, it was about where do I want to spend my energy, which speaks to what you were saying, Pam. And I want to spend my energy on creating strong relationships. Like, I don't want to spend my energy fitting into another system necessarily. And if my child said, I want to go into this system, absolutely there to support them. That feels very different. But if I'm just getting frustrated and saying, oh, it's because we're unschooling, that's why they're staying up all night or doing this, and it's interesting because I think when you've been in other worlds, we have unschooled all along because it kind of just happened naturally for us. But at early years, David was working in more of a kind of corporate environment, and would just hear like the nighttime frustrations and all the things that were happening with very, mainstream, choosing all the conventional path people. And so it really does. That's where I'm getting to where it gets us stuck, right? It gets us stuck on it's the unschooling when in fact these are broader issues when we're talking about food and sleep and parenting and sibling relationships, and all of that has really nothing to do with unschooling. An unschooling environment can actually make some of those things easier, but it's not a cure-all and it's not the cause. And so I think watch for, again, when your thoughts are being limited by that, to just say, is this really a problem that would exist if we weren't unschooling, and what would it look like, and what other things might it be inviting in if we did? Because I think it just, and for me, I always talk about just slowing it down, just giving myself a pause, thinking a little bit more about it, walking through some of those scenarios. How would I feel in those different scenarios before I just kind of run with the snap judgment and say it's the unschooling?
Yeah. I had a thought when you were talking about like the belief that unschooling means everything's always going to be easy and great,
Right.
also might be like a barrier here, where it's like, if I am having a problem, it's definitely that we're doing unschooling wrong, or that unschooling is the issue, because we're not supposed to have any problems anymore. I found unschooling, now it should be easy. And so that could be another little place where we could get stuck, and kind of just have to think through, like, that thought experiment always works for me. Like, would it be an easier, better life for me and my kids if we did this, if we sent them to school, if whatever? And it just, it just opens up so many thoughts. And then I feel also like what you were talking about went back to Pam's thing of like, the unschooling journey changes us. Like, it's about opening our minds to all of the possibilities. And so I know you've talked about, Anna, before, like that kind of comfort and safety that comes from being in the system and not being responsible for the different decisions that you're making. And so there could be something about those mainstream parents, that David was hearing, where it's like, they don't really feel like it's on them, though. Like, they're having the bedtime struggles, but they've heard what you're supposed to do, and they're doing what you're supposed to do. And if it's not working, it's just like, not my fault, nothing we could do. It's just really hard. And we can complain about it. But I think the unschooling journey opened my mind, like you were saying, Pam, to just all the choices. These are actual choices, and we don't have to be doing the one way. There is no one right way. And so now that I know that, there isn't really a way to go back to trusting the system to make all of the decisions for me, or believing that there's a right way and trying to find it. It's just not, that's just not how I can think of it anymore. And so, in that way, unschooling is to blame, but only in that now I know about all the choices. So I do think that part's interesting.
Yeah, I love that. It really does just kind of open your eyes to so much. You think, at first, I don't, for me anyway, especially since my kids were leaving school, it was like, okay, we're not doing school. So how are we going to learn instead? But then through like deschooling that first year, it just opened up a whole world of new choices and curiosity. And hopefully, I don't forget. There were two things I wanted to mention. One is like when we're doing this processing, I always go back to beginner's mind. It's like
Yeah.
when I tunnel in and I hear myself saying things like, but what's the right way? What's the best way? Like, is unschooling the best way? And everybody should be doing it. Like if I'm using kind of language like that, that's like, okay, like I don't have to tell myself I'm wrong at all, but it's like I want to open up to more possibilities because then I'm looking only for the things that match the one thing that I think is the right answer, right? And that throws me off. I'm not going to really understand context. We talk about context so much. I'm not really going to see the actual real people in my family, which kind of leads to the other point I wanted to make was, when you're hearing those different stories from other parents, I think often I'm doing all the right things to get them to go to sleep, et cetera, and they're not going to sleep. They kind of, I hear anyway, like they're blaming their kids for being wrong. Like they are not doing this right. They're not, I'm telling them, you go and you lie down and you listen and the lights off and you'll go to sleep. Like just that's it. And not seeing again the thing that we talk about so much that people are different. That like so I remember trying to help my kids go to sleep before when they were in school, right? It was, that whole kind of evening thing, trying to help them individually in how they liked to get to sleep. But I mean, so many of the recommendations were like, you say goodnight, turn off the light, close the door. Like they've had their snack, they've had their drink, they don't need blah, 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 blah. And so then you really think that I'm doing all the right things. My kids are just not performing correctly. So yeah, it's a fascinating piece. And yes, I
Yeah,
think
and
we just lost Erica there for a
I
second.
know.
She's gonna
So I'm
pop
hoping
back
she's
in.
gonna pop back in, but I'm gonna keep talking because okay, good.
Yeah.
She's coming back to us. Because something she said I thought was really important, and there was one little kind of nuance I wanted to add to it that got me sparked when she was thinking. So basically that piece of sometimes it's easier to hand over our responsibility to the system, right? Like, okay, well, we're doing all the things we're supposed to do. So then I'm not responsible. Like if they don't get educated at school, it's the school's problem. It's not here. But what I think, so I think it's interesting to think, am I wanting to ask myself, am I wanting to kind of offload some responsibility? But then another nuance to that is what's so beautiful about what we describe and talk about is that it isn't all on me. Like it is, we're each on our own journey and it is about helping and facilitating each other. So it's not like, this one thing needs to have all the answers. And then if I'm going to let go of that system, then I have to have all the answers. Me, Anna, the mom, the whatever, no, it's like we're exploring this together. We're figuring out what works together. And that's why for me, whether they choose to go to school or not go to school is really irrelevant. It really is just, are we supporting the path that we all are wanting to take and exploring things in the way that we want to explore? So I think watch for that piece was helpful for me. Like, am I trying to not have the responsibility? And then, okay, if I take it on, am I taking on just my pieces, or am I trying to take on everybody's pieces, thinking I'm the only person that can solve it, fix it? I'm ultimately responsible. And I think parents are handed that a lot in our culture, right? That you're responsible for raising your children. And I guess what I learned, and for myself and my core beliefs are just that, again, we're all humans on our own individual journey. And I love being there to walk with my kids, support them, facilitate things, all of those pieces. But in the end, I'm not responsible for their life. That's really up to them, the choices they make. And I can provide information and I can support and I can give them the context of what's happening around. But ultimately, what I see is that they're quite capable of making those choices for themselves. And so I think there's some interesting pieces to explore there if you find yourself wobbling a little bit, to go, okay, wait, am I taking on too much? Am I wanting to give it away? Because what's interesting is when we give it away to a system, we're kind of giving away other people's power as well. So is there a discussion there, And so I don't know, that just what sparked when you were talking, Erica. So I'm glad you're back.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have more to add about that, but I do love the just kind of like a lot of the things we talk about, just like noticing those little things where it's rubbing, or where I'm like reaching for control, reaching for, like a solution the one right way, any of those things. I like that as kind of a sign to start digging a little bit deeper. So
Yes, I would take that and then not using the word unschooling for a while and see what you discover.
Yeah.
I think that will be super interesting to see. Well, how else would I describe it? Because so much of it is just life and relationships and who we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. And I hope you'll consider joining us at the Living Joyfully Network. We love to dive into these kind of topics and think about it in all the different ways. And we have such amazing families there that are into these discussions as well. So we would love to welcome you. To learn more and to join us, just follow the link in the show notes, or you can go to the livingjoyfully.com and click on community in the menu. So thank you for joining us again. And thank you, the two of you. It's great to see you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.